On a dry hilltop in southeastern Turkey, farmers spent generations plowing a low, rounded mound they thought was nothing. Just a hill. A useless swell of dirt with a few broken stones poking through the topsoil. They plowed around the stones. They cursed them. Some of them chipped the tops off to clear the field. For thousands of years, nobody looked underneath. Underneath was a temple older than writing, older than the wheel, older than farming, older than pottery, older than the first city, older than metal of any kind. Buried beneath that hill was a ring of stone pillars carved by human hands almost 12,000 years ago, 7,000 years before the first Egyptian pyramid, 6,000 years before Stonehenge, built by people who, according to everything we thought we knew, should not have been able to build anything at all. And here is the part that changes everything. It wasn't destroyed. It wasn't left to fall apart. Somebody took this enormous, sacred, impossible place and they buried it. On purpose. They hauled thousands of tons of dirt and rubble by hand and packed it around those pillars until the whole thing vanished from the surface of the earth. Then the people who did it disappeared from history, and the knowledge of how they built it disappeared with them. We know the place is real. We can walk into it right now. It has a name. And the deeper archaeologists dig, the worse the mystery gets. Because this wasn't one temple. It was the tip of something much larger. And more than 90% of it is still in the ground. I'm going to show you exactly what they found under that hill, why the calendar carved into one of its stones may record the day the sky fell, and why a team of the world's best archaeologists now believes an entire civilization existed, thrived, and vanished before the history books think civilization even began. Stay with me, because the third discovery is the one that keeps researchers up at night. The site is called Göbekli Tepe. In Turkish, the name means pot-belly hill, because from a distance, the mound has a soft, rounded belly shape, sitting about 50 feet above the plain around it. For decades, that shape was the only clue. A survey team from the University of Chicago actually walked across it back in 1963 and noted the broken limestone slabs sticking out of the ground. They assumed the slabs were medieval gravestones. They wrote it down, filed the report, and moved on. Nobody came back for 30 years. Then in 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt read that old report. Something about it bothered him. He drove out to the hill himself, and the moment he stood on top of it, he understood what everyone else had missed. Those weren't gravestones. The rounded shape of the hill wasn't natural. From that perch, 1,000 feet above the valley, you can see to the horizon in almost every direction. And Schmidt could feel that a place this commanding, this deliberately shaped, could only be the work of human hands. He said, later it was clear right away this was a gigantic Stone Age site. A year after that first visit, he came back with 5 colleagues. And within days, they were pulling the first megaliths out of the earth, a few of them buried so close to the surface that the plows had already scarred their faces. As they dug down, the pillars resolved into rings. He would spend the rest of his life on this hill, and it would consume him. He died in 2014, with the overwhelming majority of the site still untouched, still buried, still keeping its secret. He barely scratched the surface. Literally. What Schmidt pulled out of the ground rewrote the timeline of the human race. Massive T-shaped pillars, some of them over 16 feet tall, some weighing up to 20 tons, carved from solid limestone. Arranged in rings, the biggest, one about 65 feet across. 2 enormous pillars standing in the center of each ring, facing each other, with more pillars set into a wall curving around them, and every surface covered in carvings. Foxes, boars, snakes, scorpions, vultures, lions, cranes. Carved in relief, some of them standing out from the stone. Animals frozen mid-motion in a place that had no business existing. Look closer at those T-shaped pillars, because they aren't just posts. Look at the 2 giant ones standing in the center of each ring. They have arms, long, thin arms, carved in low relief down the sides of the stone, bending at the elbow, with hands and fingers meeting at the front, right where a belt and a loincloth are carved into the rock. These pillars aren't abstract shapes. They're bodies, towering, faceless stone beings, 16 feet tall, standing guard in the center of every ring, watching over whatever happened there. The people who built this place weren't stacking rocks. They were raising a congregation of stone giants and hiding them in the dark. And the animals carved across the surfaces are not gentle. This isn't a peaceful menagerie. It's a bestiary of things that bite, sting, and kill. Snakes pouring down the stone in tangled knots, scorpions with their tails raised, wild boar with tusks bared, foxes mid-lunge, vultures with outstretched wings. On one pillar, a boar so detailed you can see the ridge of its spine. On another, a creature crawling head first down the stone toward whoever stood below. Whatever this place was for, it was not comfortable. It was meant to be felt. It was meant to unsettle you. Here is why that shouldn't be possible. When Göbekli Tepe was built, there was no agriculture here. None. The people who quarried these 20-ton blocks carved them with nothing but flint tools, dragged them across the landscape, and stood them upright in careful geometric rings, were hunter-gatherers. They had no metal, no wheel, no draft animals, no writing to plan with, no farming to feed a permanent workforce. And yet feeding the workforce is exactly the problem. To build something on this scale, you need to gather large numbers of people in one place and keep them fed for weeks, months, seasons at a stretch. Digging through the fill, archaeologists found the answer. Bone. Over 100,000 fragments of animal bone. From wild gazelle, wild aurochs, wild boar, birds. Evidence of enormous feasts, and traces of wild grain being processed, possibly brewed. People were traveling to this hill from a radius of well over 100 kilometers, gathering by the hundreds, eating, building, and worshipping together, long before anyone had planted a single deliberate field. By the old rules of history, monuments like this are supposed to come thousands of years after farming, after cities, after kings. This came first. It came before all of it. There are no houses here, no hearths for cooking a family meal, no trash pits, no signs of anyone actually living on the hill. This was not a town. It was a destination, a place people came to for reasons powerful enough to justify moving mountains of stone, and then went home. That single fact broke the model that every history textbook was built on. The old story said farming came first, then villages, then religion, then temples. Göbekli Tepe flips the entire sequence. It suggests the temple came first, and that the effort of building it and feeding the crowds who gathered to build it may be what pushed people toward farming in the first place. As one Stanford archaeologist put it, this completely changes the cards on the table. All the old theories were wrong, but the pillars themselves are not the real mystery. The real mystery is what was done to them. And this is the first clue. Every single one of these rings was deliberately buried, not eroded over, not slowly covered by drifting sand, buried by hand, on purpose. The builders filled the enclosures with rubble, dirt, broken stone tools, and animal bone, packing it in around the pillars until the entire complex was sealed underground. This is why the carvings survived in such astonishing condition. The dirt protected them. The parts of the site that stayed near the surface got scarred by plows. The parts they buried stayed perfect for 12,000 years, like a message packed away in a time capsule. For decades, this was treated as a footnote, a strange quirk. But think about what it actually means. These people spent generations building this place, quarrying stone with hand tools, moving weight that would challenge modern machinery. And then, after roughly 1,600 years of use, they took the single most important, most sacred structure their world had ever produced, and they made it disappear. They erased it from the surface of the earth so completely that it stayed hidden until a farmer's plow chipped a pillar in the 20th century. Think about the sheer labor of it for a moment. To bury a ring 65 feet across, packed with pillars 16 feet tall, you don't shovel a light covering over the top. You fill the entire enclosure, floor to rim, with rubble and soil and broken tools and the bones of the animals from the feasts, and you keep filling until the stone giants are drowned in earth. Then you do it again to the next ring, and the next, over and over across the whole hilltop, until the mound itself is built up out of the burials, layer stacked on layer, until Potbelly Hill takes on its rounded shape from the outside. The hill everyone plowed for thousands of years is not a natural hill at all. It is a hill made of buried temples. Why would anyone do that? Why build something monumental only to hide it? That question has no agreed answer. Some researchers think it was a ritual closing, a deliberate ending of one era to begin another, the way you might respectfully retire something sacred rather than let it decay. Some think a new belief system replaced the old one, and the old temple had to be sealed away, desanctified, put beyond reach. Some think it was meant to protect the place or to protect the people from it. Nobody knows. What everyone agrees on is that it was intentional, it was enormous, and it was the last thing these people did before they walked away. They didn't forget this place. They didn't abandon it to time. They chose to end it, and they put an extraordinary amount of work into making sure it ended completely. And that brings us to the second clue, carved into the stone itself. This is the one that connects a hilltop in Turkey to a catastrophe that reshaped the entire planet. One pillar at the site is labeled Pillar 43. Archaeologists call it the vulture stone because of the huge vulture carved across its face. One wing bent as if holding a disc, a small round object above it. Below the vulture, a scene of animals, symbols, and a headless human figure. For years, it was interpreted as art, symbolic, ornamental, a picture of animals and a bird, nothing more. For decades, scholars dismissed it as decoration. Then a scientist at the University of Edinburgh named Dr. Martin Sweatman looked at it differently. He proposed that the animals on Pillar 43 aren't just animals, they're constellations, star groups, the way ancient people saw them in the sky. And when you read the stone that way, using the slow wobble of the Earth's axis to wind the sky backward, the pattern of those constellations lines up with a specific date, not a vague one. A date around 10,950 BCE, give or take a couple of centuries. That date is not random. It sits almost exactly on top of one of the most violent events in the recent history of the planet. Around 10,850 BCE, the Earth appears to have been struck by a swarm of comet fragments. The impact is thought to have triggered a sudden, brutal cold snap called the Younger Dryas, a mini ice age that slammed the northern hemisphere for over 1,000 years, wiped out entire species of large animals, drove the extinction of the Clovis people in North America, and helped end the way of life humans had followed for tens of thousands of years. And the physical evidence for this event is not fringe. Sediment layers from that period in North America and Greenland contain spikes of platinum and microscopic nanodiamonds, the kind of signature you'd expect from an extraordinary cosmic impact. And here is the detail that makes it land close to home. One of the proposed airbursts from that same event is thought to have gone off only about 150 kilometers south of Göbekli Tepe, over a place called Abu Huraira, destroying one of the earliest known human settlements on Earth. The people who later built this temple lived in a landscape scarred by that catastrophe. Their parents' parents' parents may have watched the sky burn. If any human memory anywhere on Earth would carry the scar of that day, packed down through the generations as story and ritual until someone finally cut it into stone, this hilltop, this close to the blast, is exactly where you'd expect to find it. So here is what Sweatman is actually claiming: that the people of Göbekli Tepe carved a memorial to the day the sky fell, that they recorded the position of the stars at the moment of a global catastrophe and cut it into stone so it would never be forgotten. And in 2024, he went further. He argued that the V-shaped marks carved into Pillar 43 and repeated across the site form a calendar. 12 lunar months plus 11 extra days tracking the sun and the moon at the same time. A working solar calendar carved 12,000 years ago, which would make it the oldest calendar ever found by roughly 10,000 years, and possibly the earliest evidence of arithmetic anywhere on Earth. Now, I want to be honest with you, because this is where a good investigation slows down. This interpretation is fiercely disputed. Many mainstream archaeologists reject it. They point out that these buildings were rebuilt and modified over centuries, that some may have had roofs, which undercuts the idea of an open-air sky observatory. They argue Sweatman started with the answer and worked backward, matching animals to constellations to fit a date he already believed in. That criticism is fair, and you should hold on to it. The star calendar reading is a hypothesis, not a proven fact. But strip all of that away, and something undeniable remains. Whether or not the Vulture Stone is a calendar, whether or not it records a comet, we are still standing in front of a 12,000-year-old megalithic complex built by people who supposedly had no capacity for this kind of coordination. Carved with an obsessive, deliberate symbolic system we still cannot fully read. The debate is about how much these people knew. It is not about whether they built something that should not exist. They did. It's still there. If a channel covering the mysteries the history books skip over is something you want more of, take a second and subscribe. Because the next discovery is the one that turned a single strange hilltop into something far larger and far harder to explain. Because Göbekli Tepe is not alone. For years, people assumed it was a one-off, a freak, a single, inexplicable site out in the Anatolian hills. Then, archaeologists started surveying the surrounding land, and they found more mounds, rounded hills with T-shaped pillar tops poking out of the dirt, exactly like Potbelly Hill had before Schmidt dug in. Not one, not two, a whole cluster of them scattered across the region around the modern city of Şanlıurfa. Today, they're studied together under a single name, the Taş Tepeler, the Stone Hills. Around a dozen sites, all from the same impossibly early window of time. And that changes the entire meaning of what Schmidt found. A single anomaly can be explained away. A tribe that got lucky. A one-time burst of inspiration that led nowhere. But a landscape dotted with them, mound after mound, built to the same plan across the same centuries, is not a fluke. It is the fingerprint of a people. A shared culture with shared beliefs, shared architecture, and shared secrets, spread across the hills of a whole region and then buried, one by one, and forgotten for 12,000 years. The most important of them sits about 45 kilometers east of Göbekli Tepe. It's called Karahan Tepe. It was first spotted in 1997, when an archaeologist noticed the tops of T-shaped pillars breaking the surface, the same telltale sign that fooled everyone at Potbelly Hill. And then, like so much in this story, it was left alone. For more than 2 decades, it sat there, surveyed but barely touched, overshadowed by its famous neighbor. Serious excavation didn't begin until 2019. 2 more decades of a world-changing site sitting silent in the ground, waiting, while everyone looked the other way. What came out of the ground at Karahan Tepe is staggering. The site spans over 300,000 square meters, more than 260 standing pillars, some over 4 meters tall, arranged in circular and oval enclosures. Rooms carved directly down into the living bedrock, entered from above through openings in the roof, connected in a honeycomb of chambers dug into the stone. In one of them, A semi-subterranean shrine, 11 towering phallic pillars stand in a ring, all of them carved to rise straight up out of the rock floor, watched over by a single stone head that emerges from the wall as if it's surfacing out of the rock itself. It is one of the most striking rooms ever uncovered from the ancient world, and it was carved by people who supposedly hadn't invented farming yet. And here is the crucial part. Only a small fraction of Karahan Tepe has been excavated. Serious digging only began in 2019, and researchers freely admit that most of the site is still provisional, still guesswork, still in the ground. Like Göbekli Tepe, it too appears to have been deliberately buried and abandoned at the end of its era, its rooms carefully filled in with stone. Geophysical surveys, scanning underground without digging, show extensive structures still hidden across the entire hilltop. We are reading the opening lines of a book that runs for hundreds of pages, and almost all of them are still sealed. Now put the pieces together. We are not looking at a single lonely temple built by a fluke tribe. We are looking at a network. Multiple monumental sites spread across a landscape, all built in the same style, in the same deep antiquity, by the same vanished people, and in site after site, deliberately buried before being abandoned. This wasn't one strange act by one strange group. This was an entire culture, a civilization in every meaningful sense of the word, that flourished 12,000 years ago, mastered monumental stone construction with nothing but flint, coordinated hundreds of people across a whole region, developed a shared symbolic language, and then vanished so thoroughly that we didn't even know it existed until the 1990s. And most of it is still underground. At Göbekli Tepe, the early geophysical surveys suggested there could be around 20 enclosures buried in the mound. Only a handful have ever been excavated. The German Archaeological Institute has said openly that some parts of the site may never be dug at all. Across all the Stonehills sites combined, the overwhelming majority of the structures the ground scans have detected have never been touched by a trowel. We have seen a few rooms of an enormous buried complex, and even those few rooms rewrote the human story. Nobody knows what the rest of it says. Here's where it gets stranger still. Consider the pattern that keeps repeating across these sites. The number 11. Enclosures ringed by 11 pillars around a central pair. 11 rectangular elements carved into the vulture stone. The 11 extra days in the proposed calendar. That underground shrine at Karahan Tepe, 11 pillars standing in a ring. Whether or not you accept the astronomical reading, the number shows up again and again, deliberately, across different buildings and different sites, separated by dozens of kilometers and possibly by centuries. That is not coincidence. That is a convention, a rule, a piece of shared knowledge passed from builder to builder, from generation to generation, held onto with enough discipline that it survives in the stone for us to count today. Think about what that requires. To repeat a specific number across sites and across time, you need memory that outlives individuals. You need to teach it, preserve it, insist on it. These were not random arrangements. Something specific was being counted, something specific was being recorded and repeated and preserved with obsessive care. These people weren't decorating. They were documenting. They had something they were determined not to lose. Something worth carving into 20-ton stone and guarding across generations. And then, in the end, they buried all of it. The question that no one can answer is what they knew and why, after everything, they decided the world should not see it. So let's slow down and ask the honest question. Does any of this prove a lost, advanced civilization, some forgotten superculture with knowledge beyond its time? Probably not. And it doesn't need to. The grounded explanation is arguably more remarkable than the fantasy. What the evidence actually shows is that hunter-gatherers, people we've spent a century dismissing as primitive, simple, incapable of abstract thought, were nothing of the kind. They organized labor on a massive scale with no kings and no writing to command it. Stop and think about how hard that is. To move a 20-ton block, you need dozens, maybe hundreds of people pulling in coordination, fed and housed and directed. And you need to do it without a single written instruction, without a wheel, without a rope stronger than plant fiber and rawhide, without a metal tool anywhere on Earth. They quarried these giants out of the bedrock with stone. They shaped them with stone. They carved fine, flowing animals into them with stone. And they raised them upright and set them in rings measured out with a precision we can still see 12,000 years later. They developed a rich, consistent symbolic system and carried it across an entire region, from Göbekli Tepe to Karahan Tepe and beyond. The same T-shaped beings, the same dangerous animals, the same recurring number 11. They tracked animals, seasons, and quite possibly the stars. And they did it thousands of years before farming, which means everything we were taught about the order of human progress was backward. Civilization, or at least the ambition and coordination that makes civilization possible, came before the farm, before the city, before the wheel, before the written word. The temple didn't crown a civilization that already existed. The temple may have been the thing that dragged civilization into being. That is not a small correction. That is a missing chapter torn out of the front of the human story. And if that's true, it means we have badly underestimated the people who came before us for a very long time. But even the careful, grounded version leaves the hard question standing. It doesn't tell us why they buried it. It doesn't tell us what the 11-fold patterns count, or what the vulture stone was trying to say, or what's carved on the pillars still sealed in the 90% of the site nobody has excavated. It doesn't tell us where these people went, or why an entire monument building culture rose up in this one place, thousands of years ahead of everyone else, and then sealed its greatest works underground and walked into silence. They left us a message 12,000 years old. We've only read the first page, and even that first page rewrote everything. Somewhere under those quiet Turkish hills, the rest of it is still waiting. Rings of carved stone still buried in the dark, exactly where their makers left them, sealed by hands that vanished before history began, holding whatever it was they thought was worth hiding from the world forever. The plows still turn the soil above them. Most people still walk right past, and the answer is still down there, under the sand, exactly where it has been the whole time. If this pulled you in, the next investigation on screen right now goes even deeper into the world these people left behind. Watch it now.